Here we'll be turning to our last topic for this lecture, technological change. So we've looked at how we model the firm's production function, how it makes that trade-off between how much capital and labor to use in cost minimization. And now we're going to look at what happens as another factor changes, namely technology. So if we look over time, right, firms have increasing amount of output with inputs being held constant or even potentially reducing. So that change is what we refer to as total factor productivity growth, and it occurs because of technological change, right? What the technological change does is allow the firm to keep their output constant while being on a new lower ISO cost curve. Okay, so they're able to use fewer inputs, reducing their costs, and producing the same amount of output. We model this total factor productivity using A in our production function. So it's modifying both the use of capital and labor and their interaction. So here you can see a general Cobb-Douglas production function where I've added this technology variable in. So we have quantity of output equal to A times capital to the alpha times labor to the beta power. And you can see that as we find the marginal product of labor and the marginal product of capital, that A remains unmodified. So it's just lifting up whatever productivity labor or capital has absent that technology. So let's look at an example. So let's say that we have quantity equal to K to the 1/2 power times L to the 1/2 power, right? We've solved this one several times for the marginal product of labor and the marginal product of capital. So I'm just going to rewrite these here. So our marginal product of labor is going to be equal to K over L, all to the 1/2 power. And our marginal product of capital is going to be equal to L over K, all to the 1/2 power. All right, so let's say that we're working with the same firm. So they have the same production function, except there's been some technological innovation. So A goes from being of the value 1 to the value 5. So we have quantity equal to 5 times K to the 1/2 power times L to the 1/2 power. As we find the firm's marginal product of labor, this 5 is going to remain, all right? So marginal product of labor here is the change in output given a change in labor only. And so we're going to use that power rule and multiply the exponent 1/2 by the constants modifying labor. So we'll have 1/2 times 5 times K to the 1/2 power times L to the 1/2 power, and we subtract 1 from that exponent. So simplifying, we have 5 over 2 times K to the 1/2 power times L to the negative 1/2. And we can rewrite this equation as 5 times K to the 1/2 all over 2 times L to the 1/2 power. And so you can see that the marginal product of labor here is being modified by 5 halves or 2.5, right? So it's going to be 2.5 times greater than marginal product of labor without that technology shock. All right, we can see the same thing for marginal product of capital, which again is the change in output over the change in capital. So only capital is changing. So we're going to have to find this value, the power rule. So we'll multiply that exponent by the constants modifying capital. So we'll have 1/2 times 5L to the 1/2 power times K to the negative 1/2, right? We're subtracting 1 from that exponent. And so 1/2 minus 1 leaves us with negative 1/2. We can rewrite this similarly to what we did before as 5 halves times capital to the negative 1/2 times labor to the positive 1/2. And since that capital has a negative exponent, move it into the denominator. So we'll have 5 times L to the 0.5 power over 2 times K to the 1/2 power, right? So again, here we're seeing that the marginal product of capital is being modified by this 5 over 2 fraction, meaning that it's going to be 2.5 times larger than the marginal product of capital was without that technology shock. So we can see that that technology is now making capital and labor both more productive by the same degree. An example of this in history is the plow. If you ever take a medieval history class, you'll probably see that your professor is obsessed with the is obsessed with the plow, and that's because the invention of the plow immensely increased the agricultural productivity of humans. Right. So initially, the plow was handheld and was literally back-breaking work. Right. So humans had to power it. We're not that strong when you take into context all the animals that exist. And so when people changed the plow such that it was being pulled by oxen who were immensely stronger than us, right? They were much more productive. They were able to plow a lot more of their fields than they were just using the plow by themselves. And from that point, we saw innovation after innovation occur until we get to today, right? When we have the tractor. And that automated tractor is much more productive, much quicker in tilling a field than definitely the handheld plow or even the oxen pulled plow. So we see this increase in output with either the same or fewer resources or inputs going into that production process. All right, so with that, that's concluding our lecture on producer behavior. Please make sure you watch all of the videos, not just this one. Review them and post on the discussion board any questions you have, and we'll go over them in class.